Welcome to Holmes on Health, the podcast where nutrition, fitness, and hormones meet health span, and science meets real life. I'm Dr. Alan Holmes, a recovering emergency physician, an expert in hormone optimization, metabolic wellness, and living life fully optimized. Each week, we dive into the tools, truths, and evidence-based therapies to help you build a stronger body, sharper mind, and more vibrant life. Whether you're curious, confused, or already optimizing, you're in the right place. Thank you for being here. Let's get into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to this next episode of Holmes on Health. I'm Dr. Alan Holmes. Today, we're going to be talking about muscle, not the six-pack abs or the biceps, although those can be important, but we're going to talk about muscle as it relates to our health, how it relates to our metabolic health, as well as our longevity. My goal from this episode is that you're going to think about muscle more than just biceps and abs, but you're going to think of it as a tool that is directly related to your quality of life, directly related to your metabolic health, and the vitality that you want to have in the future. So let's get into this. Let's start with the basics. What is skeletal muscle? Well, in fact, it's actually an organ. We think of muscle as that's which is attached to our bones and helps us move. We walk, we pick things up, we carry things, absolutely does all those things. But skeletal muscle is also an organ, an incredibly complex organ that has a direct link to our metabolic health reduction. Unlike body fat, it's actually metabolically active, which is super important for our overall health. In fact, skeletal muscle is super important for overall metabolic health because it helps us regulate insulin, helps us regulate our blood sugar, as well as is involved in fat metabolism. The more muscle mass you have, the better your quality of life, the less likely you are to develop metabolic syndrome, things like diabetes or insulin resistance. You can think of muscle as a metabolic engine, and the more powerful that engine is, the better off you are. Another analogy I like to give is think of muscle mass as a furnace. So the bigger furnace you have and the hotter it burns, the more things you can burn. When we think about the things that we're going to burn, we think about glucose. Because every time you eat carbohydrates in food, your body turns that into glucose. And then that glucose needs to be burned for energy, because if it doesn't get burned, it gets stored. There are actually studies that took people that were insulin resistant or pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, and the only intervention they made was a resistance training program for muscle mass. And in those studies, they saw a dramatic improvement in insulin resistance in those patients without any other intervention. They've even done studies where they've taken patients, and in one group of the patients, they did a resistance training program. In the other group of patients, they did an aerobic training program, and the resistance training program patients did vastly better. So why is this? Well, the reality is that your skeletal muscle is responsible for 75% of all of your glucose metabolism. So it is the largest reservoir in the body that deals with, handles, metabolizes, or burns the glucose that we put into it. So let's think about skeletal muscle as it's related to longevity. And let's start with just some practical examples. We use skeletal muscle to carry things, to carry our groceries. We use skeletal muscles to climb steps, to get out of our car, to carry our suitcase, to put it in the bin up above us on the airplane. There isn't much activity in life that doesn't involve some type of skeletal muscle. And therefore, the more skeletal muscle we have, the more and the longer we can continue to do those activities. I mean, who of us, when we get older and have our grandkids, don't want to be able to get down on the floor and play with them and wrestle with them, but also have the strength and enough muscle mass to get up back out of the floor? It is a great sign of functional strength and health, not just what you can accomplish in your gym routine. Our muscle mass also has a direct role in our balance. And balance is super important as we age. If we have better balance, that means it's less likely that we're going to fall down, which could lead to a fracture, which also could lead to a loss of independence. Did you know that according to the World Health Organization, falls are the second leading cause of death in the world today? They account for over 650,000 deaths per year. Now, most of these deaths occur after the age of 75. However, the numbers still really start rising after 65. Maintaining muscle mass dramatically reduces our risk of fall. And that is in part because of physics. The amount of force, let's say that you're walking down the sidewalk and you stumble and slip and you have to catch yourself. The amount of force that is placed on the limb that is catching you can be up to 10 times your body weight, a huge amount of force. So it makes sense that if we have weak muscles and weak bones, our risk of actually falling down or breaking a bone increases. So I think or at least I hope, we've established now why skeletal muscle is so important. But let's talk about how can we maintain it, or better yet, how can we get more of it? We'll start with nutrition. And when we think about nutrition and skeletal muscle, we're talking about protein, because in order to maintain the muscle mass or gain the muscle mass, you have to feed those muscles. And this is all about protein intake. Why protein? The building blocks of the muscle are actually what's called amino acids. And it is protein in their complete forms that are that provide the essential amino acids. That's the important part, because all protein isn't created equal. And we're looking for the protein that has all the essential amino acids that the muscle needs to maintain and grow. The biggest sources of these proteins are actually dairy and meat products. However, there are ways with some education and reading of the labels to where you can get adequate protein supplies through other sources for those that are vegan or vegetarian. The next question may be, well, how much protein are you talking about? For our patients at our clinic at BioSymmetry Wilmington, we typically shoot for around 0.8 grams of protein per pound of ideal body weight, although that could easily go up to 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. And as we age, the older we are, the more protein we actually need. I tell my patients in my clinic, you're never going to hear me say that I think you're eating too much protein. That would be really, really difficult unless maybe you had some somewhat rare kidney issues. So the more protein, the better. All right, so we've established that we need to feed the muscles, but we also need to challenge the muscles. What do I mean by this? Resistance training. There's simply no substitute for it. The way to maintain the muscle mass and gain the muscle mass is through resistance training. It's not cardio, it's not walking, although both those are very, very important for health. But if we're talking about maintaining muscle mass, we've got to challenge the muscles through resistance training. So what does this look like? It can look a lot of different ways. It could be body weight exercises like air squats or lunges or push-ups. Or maybe you can't do a push-up, and maybe that's a wall push-up or a push-up on your knees. The other end of the extreme would be that you're going to a gym, you've got a trainer, and you're lifting heavy weights with like back squats and deadlifts and those types of big compound movements that get lots of muscles involved. The key to it is this. You want to lift as heavy as possible to really challenge those muscles to get them to respond for growth. But of course, we don't want to lift so heavy that we get hurt, because then we're on the couch and we're going to be losing muscle mass. So form is incredibly important. This is where a personal trainer can be really, really valuable in some situations if you're not used to lifting. But now in this day and age with the internet and so many videos, you can learn a lot about how to lift with proper form so as to not get hurt, but be able to lift heavy so as to really challenge those muscles and maintain that muscle mass. Let's talk through a couple of the other nuances. How often do I need to lift? I would say 2 to 3 days a week as a minimum. I would say 1 day a week probably isn't going to get you there, but nobody needs to be lifting 6 to 7 days a week, at least not the average person. Perhaps if you're trying to get in competition shape and want to be on the stage, then maybe you need that kind of volume. But for most people, 2 to 3 days of really intentional resistance training is going to be enough. What does that look like? Well, you could do a full body routine each day where you're working the upper body and the lower body. Some people decide that they want to do an upper body day and then do a lower body day, and that's fine. Some people split it up to where they do a push versus pull type of routine. All of that doesn't really matter for the average person. The important part is just getting the reps in and getting the work in. One of the common misconceptions, particularly for females when it comes to resistance training, is that they have this fear that they're going to get really bulky. I'm going to let you know, that's really, really difficult to do. Professional athletes that dedicate hours and hours every week to their nutrition and to their workouts, trying to get bulky or really increase their lean muscle mass, struggle. So the average person eating high protein diet and doing some resistance training, that's probably not going to happen to you. Because if it was so easy to get bulky, a lot of these professional athletes and bodybuilders wouldn't have to work so hard to make it happen. So don't worry about getting bulky with resistance training. Actually, what's going to happen is that you're going to build lean muscle, which is going to increase your metabolism and therefore take fat mass off of you. And you're going to look and feel leaner, not the opposite. Okay, talk about skeletal muscle mass as is it related to our age. We talked about being old usually means that we're going to be losing muscle mass, and that's where the real problems start with falls and that sort of thing. However, muscle mass loss starts actually in our 30s, which is pretty young. So it's never too early to start working on maintaining muscle mass, because the earlier you start and the more you have when you start, the more you're going to be able to hang on to. As we age, at some point, it's going to become quite difficult to increase our lean muscle mass in any significant way. That being said, there are studies and more coming out all the time where people in their 60s and even 70s and beyond show improvement and increase in lean muscle mass, even on a small degree. But again, this is not one of those things you're going to want to start thinking about when you're 70. You want to start thinking about it now. It's never too early. What we are trying to prevent is sarcopenia, and that's a fancy term for loss of muscle mass, because that leads to frailty, falls, decreased quality of life, and a negative impact on our overall health. The good news is, as we've discussed here today, it's absolutely preventable. One last topic. What is the role of hormones when it comes to skeletal muscle mass? Well, we keep saying that as we age, it gets worse, and our skeletal muscle mass tends to decline. You want to know what else declines as we age? Our amount of hormones that we have, specifically in this case, testosterone. Testosterone plays an intricate role in maintaining and gaining muscle mass. And so there is a way to optimize testosterone levels to aid in and assist our other efforts as to maintaining our muscle mass. Meaning, with testosterone therapy, the benefits that we're going to get out of eating a high protein diet and the benefits we're going to get out of doing resistance training on a regular basis is amazing. So if you have low testosterone levels, how would you know? You get the levels tested, and optimizing those levels will enhance all the other efforts that you're making in this category. And there is a very safe and effective way to do that. In our clinic at Biosymmetry Wilmington, the results we see from our patients that combine nutrition plus resistance training plus hormone optimization, again, specifically testosterone, are absolutely amazing. The patients feel better, they move better, their overall health markers become better, including those related to metabolic health, such as insulin resistance and diabetes. So let's recap. Muscle mass just isn't about looking good. It's about living better. Muscle mass plays a role in our longevity, in our metabolic health. It plays a role in our balance. It plays a role in our strength and our ability to get up and down the steps, get out of the floor, carry our suitcase, and all the things that we want to experience as we live through life with all the vitality that we can. And don't forget, particularly if you're one that is struggling with weight, there's no better way to get lean than with muscle mass. Resistance training leading to lean muscle mass will increase your fat metabolism, therefore burn more calories, burn more fat, and make you leaner. The last thing I'll say is that if you're not currently eating a high protein diet, implementing some type of resistance training, looking into your hormone health, now is the time. My goal for you is to be as strong and as full of vitality as possible for as long as possible, and muscle mass matters. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Holmes on Health. If this information resonated with you or you got value out of it, please click the subscribe button. Please share it with your friends. Leave a comment. I really appreciate you being here and taking time to learn this information with me. Until next time, here's to living life optimized. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Holmes on Health. If you found today's episode valuable, share it with someone you care about. And hit subscribe so you never miss a future episode. Want to get more of our content? Follow me on Instagram and YouTube at Alan J. Holmes MD. Until next time, here's to living life optimized. This podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.